There has been a slew of mixed messages surrounding Bitcoin, from Elon Musk tweeting that the price of Bitcoin seemed high just as the currency surpassed the 1 trillion market value, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen saying that Bitcoin is an extremely inefficient way of conducting transactions. But on the flip side, we have Goldman Sachs now entering the Bitcoin futures market, and we also have Citi saying that Bitcoin is at a tipping point and could become the currency of choice. Joining me today on StansberryInvestor.com to digest all this is Robert Breedlove. He is the founder of Parallax Digital. He's a former hedge fund manager turned what he calls himself a Bitcoin philosopher. Robert, welcome to StansberryInvestor.com. Nice to meet you and have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Daniela.
So first, it's our first time speaking. You are a huge proponent of Bitcoin. And before we digest all these mixed messages, I would just love to get your thesis as to why you think it is the ultimate asset.
Yeah, sure. I should probably first clarify the Bitcoin philosopher title was given to me, actually.
Nice. You were knighted.
Not so presumptuous to call myself that, but it is a cool title. I do like it. I think that what's going on here with the mixed messaging is that we have a tool in Bitcoin that is a digital disruptor to a 5,000-year-old technology that's so old, many of us have forgotten why it was valuable in the first place, which is gold. And in addition to that, we've been led astray, I would argue, over the past century with all of the anti-gold propaganda. Central banks themselves are sort of talking out of two sides of their mouth, where they're saying gold's an artifact of the industrial age. We don't need it for a global society. But then out of the other side of their mouth, they're acquiring gold faster than ever before. The big theme here is that gold is money. Gold is geopolitical money. Gold is what nation states settle with one another in. The currencies that we use today, they only ever established a market value because they were once redeemable for gold or other monetary metals. In fact, currencies were introduced to scale gold. And now we've all been led astray. The link to gold was broken in 1971. The uncollateralized government debt tokens we now call money are basically just being used for nation states to implicitly default over time through inflation. So it's a big scam, and it's really disheartening maybe to realize this, that fiat currency is a scam, but it is the truth.
And this leads me to something you recently said, and I wanted you to elaborate on, and maybe this is the exact point you were making here. You say, when we conceive of the price of Bitcoin in USD terms, we are perceiving the greatest instrumental truth ever attained by mankind in terms of the greatest lie ever told. When I read that, I interpreted it as you saying the real value of each couldn't be further apart.
Yeah, I think that's one way to look at it. And then the idea behind the tweet is that when we're looking at Bitcoin in US dollar terms, which is the figure that draws everyone's attention in, right? The classical number go up, people see the Bitcoin price rising, they want to know what it is, what's going on. But to define first instrumental truth, this is a American pragmatist term, and they referred to truth actually as the end of inquiry. So we can think of, there's a capital T truth maybe that religions and whatnot try to point to, but there's an instrumental pragmatic truth that we all use every day. And it's typically expressed in a couple of forms relevant to markets. One is the price, which you'll often hear price is truth on Wall Street, just whatever something is trading for, that is the closest appraisal of its value. And another one is innovation. You could think of like the truth of digging holes, for instance, would be a shovel. It's mankind's best attempt at solving a particular problem or satisfying a particular want. With Bitcoin, we have the ultimate instrumental truth of money. It has essentially perfected all of the properties of money as a technology. And when we're perceiving its value, we're actually thinking in dollars, which it's hard to understand this perhaps, but we conceive the world through dollars. So it's kind of our perceptual aperture, which makes it really hard to think about, actually. And this is why I named the show the What is Money Show, to get people thinking about what is money, because it's my firm belief that you first need to understand what actually you're looking at what is looking in a way. So you need to look at your own aperture on the world to start to understand why Bitcoin is valuable.
I want to go back to your point where you said it's the greatest scam.
Yeah.
Just to dig a little deeper there, when you say it's the greatest scam, you mean how they led us down this road to believe that gold is not good? And are they doing the same thing with Bitcoin now?
Yeah, so no, the last piece to that is referring to the dollar itself, actually. So the dollar and all paper currencies were introduced because gold lacked portability. So there's 5 properties to money. It's durability, divisibility, recognizability, portability, scarcity. Historically, monetary metals excelled in the first 4 properties. Of the monetary metals, gold exhibited the greatest scarcity, which is to say it had the greatest inflation resistance, or in Bitcoin circles, we like to say the highest stock to flow ratio. But what it lacked, and what most monetary metals lacked, is that they're very heavy and expensive to secure. So gold was difficult to transport, and transact over space. That's why we introduced paper currencies to back it. There was a warehouse function that would basically custody gold and issue paper receipts redeemable for that gold that could then be traded as money, essentially. But over time, these centralized gold hoards became monopolized by central banks, or first of all, banks, which became central banks, and then eventually started running fractional reserves on that gold, which is a lie, by the way. You're issuing a monetary note that says it's redeemable for money, so it's a money substitute. Anytime you break that peg and it's no longer one-to-one, you're running a pyramid scheme effectively. Because if everyone comes to redeem at once, there's not enough money in the bank to satisfy the needs. And then when we finally went off the gold standard entirely in 1971, that's when we entered this age of just pure fiat money, which is a pure pyramid scheme.
So from what I'm hearing from you, Robert, are you a proponent of holding both gold and Bitcoin?
I believe if you're going to hold gold, you
Yeah.
should hold physical gold.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe paper gold is an effective means of holding because of the counterparty risk, frankly. I'll just say it like this. I'm much more bullish Bitcoin overall, given the size of its current market relative to the addressable market. So Bitcoin's right at about $1 trillion market cap, competing to be a global store value, which is probably in the range of $250 trillion if you look at everything across the board. I think Bitcoin has perfected all of the properties that made gold historically. So over time, it will demonetize gold. However, gold has a 5,000 year head start. So there's a significant amount of momentum, or as we would say, Lindy effect, which is, the longer a tool's been around, the longer it can be expected to be around. And, Bitcoin's only 12 years old. So even though it's superior, quantitatively superior across all properties of money, it's still very new relative to the ancient monetary metal.
So when you're looking at wealth preservation, Robert, would you not choose gold over Bitcoin in the long run because you're dealing with something that has a 5,000 year history compared to something that's only 12 years old? Like I'm talking like an investment of 20, 30 years out. How do we know where Bitcoin will be?
Yeah, you don't know where anything will be, but what you can do that I think is a useful exercise is if you zoom out to trying to store value over 100 years even. And if we just assume, and which we have to assume, that Bitcoin is just going to continue functioning as it has been for the past 12 years, which is a flawless operation. It's had no hacks. It is already the most secure computing network in human history. And we know with perfect fidelity its inflation rate from now until forever, essentially. If you try to store value in gold for 100 years, you're going to get inflated by at least 2% per year. Not even considering all the counterparty risk, how you're going to custody it, secure it, et cetera, et cetera. So you're talking about getting cut in half in your value storage every 35 years just on inflation. And Bitcoin is not that. You know with perfect certainty what the inflation rate for Bitcoin is and ever will be. So I would argue that Bitcoin is actually superior. It is the apex store value asset the world's ever had. It's the first instance in terms of monetary properties, by the way, of absolute scarcity. So it's something that has an absolutely fixed supply, which is not true of any physical commodity we've ever had in the world.
What do you feel the true price of gold and Bitcoin should be in today's market?
Really hard to say. First off, the price of gold is systemically suppressed in the derivatives markets. If you look at things like the London Gold Pool, there's a great website actually. This is the Gold Antitrust Task
Right,
Association, GATA.org.
right.
They go in depth on all the evidence about central banks manipulating gold in the paper markets. So, if we're on an honest gold standard, I think gold would be closer to 25 plus $1 trillion market cap. If you're talking about all governments running on a full gold reserve, I think it's closer to 80 to 100 trillion probably. But Bitcoin, again, as a disruptor to gold, I actually perceive all of the market capitalization of gold, either present or potential, as just latent demand for Bitcoin in the long run.
Why can't Bitcoin be manipulated?
Why can't the supply of Bitcoin be manipulated?
Yeah, or the price of
Uh,
Bitcoin. Like if you feel that gold is manipulated and there's obviously talk
well,
of silver manipulation.
Bitcoin,
Why
easy.
can't Bitcoin be manipulated?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is the reason gold is manipulated so heavily is because central banks own 20% of the global supply. So they've got a big toehold in the market. And also, again, back to that lacking portability, there are big gaps in gold between trade and settlement. And that's where all corruption and manipulation occur. When someone can issue a trade, or they can rehypothecate the gold, or they can, naked short it, all these things that you can do, these games you can play in the paper market. And in the settlement of gold, we actually have physical delivery to close the trade, so to speak, is very expensive, slow, and cumbersome. So most of these trades in the gold market are being done at the paper level with infrequent settlement. Bitcoin unifies trade and settlement. You can settle with finality anywhere in the world nearly instantly, basically within an hour. So it closes the window of corruption and manipulation. And central banks, further to that, they don't have a significant toehold on the network to try and run some of the same schemes they've run with gold.
So that said, Robert, if you had to give us a glimpse of what your current portfolio looks like, is it overweight Bitcoin? Are you in other cryptos, Ethereum? Do you like anything else outside of Bitcoin?
In terms of crypto assets, no, I don't. I think the way I split it is this: Bitcoin is the internet. It is an open source protocol for moving value across time and space, in the same way the internet is an open source set of open source protocols for moving information across time and space. All other crypto assets have copied the code of Bitcoin, changed it,
Right.
trying to address either trying to compete directly as money or trying to address other market needs. The whole basket of them, there's maybe 8 or 10,000 of them. They're liquid venture capital subjected to little, if any, due diligence. So they're gambles right now. There's no other market-proven use case for a crypto asset or distributed consensus. There's a lot of theory out there, and there are a lot of use cases, but nothing's been market-proven except for Bitcoin.
Just to wrap, I want to get your thoughts. You mentioned you like holding physical gold if you have to own gold.
Mhm.
On the Bitcoin side, what do you make of the emergence of these ETFs? We see Purpose in Canada. We have VanEck looking to issue one here in the US. What are your thoughts on the Bitcoin ETFs?
Yeah, and in the US, NYDIG recently filed for an ETF that I think looks like it will make it, actually. They've addressed all the mitigating factors that the SEC has brought up historically. They've got a gap approved pricing mechanism. So I think it looks like one of them will, it looks like that one will get through. Some of the ones that are up and running have historically high trading volumes. I think it's a great access point for large capital pools, and they're going to remain relevant for some time. But for the individual, it's much better to hold your own keys, just like it's much better to hold your own gold.
I guess just final thoughts for investors who are maybe, looking to get into Bitcoin or gold or silver and they're undecided. What would your advice be to these folks?
I would suggest studying money from first principles, specifically the Austrian School of Economics. That is the biggest gap in modern education. I myself have a master's degree in accounting and finance. I was never taught one stitch of Austrian economics. It
Right.
is another area that I would argue is systemically suppressed by central banks. There's a reason you don't learn about Mises or Hayek or Rothbard in college, because if you get an economics degree, there's only really one place to work, and that's for a central bank or an affiliated entity. So they don't apparently want anyone understanding the value of money from first principles. So if you really want to understand Bitcoin, you need to
Yeah.
dig. It's a technological innovation, but it's a first principles disruption of money itself. So you really have to dig in historically to comprehend the significance of Bitcoin.
Just one final thought. I've seen past interviews where you've said, Michael Saylor is a friend of the show. He's been on multiple times. You really see him going down in history with his move of being the first publicly traded company to move into
Yeah,
Bitcoin.
Saylor was my first guest on the What Is Money show, and that was my opening line is, for a company called MicroStrategy, you may have just executed the most brilliant macro strategy of all time. I think it's very important. Bitcoin is, when you dig into it, it is a binary bet. Something completely takes it out and it goes to zero, some unforeseen black swan, unforeseeable black swan, which is what a black swan is by definition, or it continues operating as it's algorithmically designed to do, just consuming more and more monetary premium from all inferior stores of value. So if it plays out to the latter, then Michael's going to be quite the historical figure.
Robert Breedlove, I appreciate you joining me today on StansberryInvestor.com. Come back.
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Daniela.
All right. Thank you. And thank you for watching. We'll have much more for you. So be sure to stay tuned to StansberryInvestor.com. In the meantime, share us where you watch us. Thanks for watching. I'm Daniela Cambone.